Okay, so this is the January 17th meeting of the Bristol Planning Commission. It is 7:08. We'll call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is to review the agenda for any additions or modifications or removals. I have nothing. Does anybody else have anything to entertain? John?
Yes, I have a couple things I'd like to propose. Given the context that in the rest of the agenda, the really heart of the meeting is about the HDR and ADUs. One, I thought we might have a specific discussion about how the Planning Commission can get a better idea of what the ADU situation is, now as it stands, and how it has developed over recent years. And it might be helpful. It might inform our conversation going forward. So I was wanting to discuss with the group, perhaps a walking tour. We can view a few ADUs and see if we learn anything, pro or con, about how we might want to do it or not do it. So that's one item I'd like to add to the agenda. The second one would be a discussion about the possibility of extending some kind of design review like we have in the downtown district to ADUs in the village planning area, or maybe at least in the HDR zone, which I think is where the ADU action and its biggest prospective impact is in that zone anyway. So that might be something to consider.
I think that one, John, I'm not sure. That one might be a little bit out of scope for this meeting, and maybe it's something that we entertain later, because I'll just leave it at that. ADUs appear to be pretty much a by right use regulated by the state, and I'm not sure exactly how much.
That's what I would tell you, and I would tell you site plan review does not apply to either single family uses or duplexes by statute, and therefore I would say it also encompasses ADUs. So off the top of my head, I don't believe you could do it.
So we probably should not add that to an agenda, because that could be a significant change to the discussion if there's merit to do that.
Well, I'd like to be able to discuss it and propose that maybe it's a good way to handle ADUs, since, basically what we're asking for and what we're seeking to do is increase density, which would be great. I certainly favor that, and I think the uneasiness that I've heard in the conversation so far have been around, can we make it fit in a way that does what the zoning regulations require already, which is to, quote, protect the existing character, unquote, of the zone. So how do we do that with ADUs, or are they unregulatable?
I will defer that to another topic for next meeting, because like I said, I think it's enough out of the scope of what we've warned for a meeting that we need to warn it as a standalone. So we'll talk, we'll review it again next meeting, but like I said, and Adam said,
I think I may be able to get to John's question through the scope of this meeting.
okay.
And it will be, let's see, part of the ADU language is it needs to be substantially subordinate to the single family structure. So at the last meeting, you all asked me to, when we said yes, we'll adopt the state definition. You also asked me to develop a definition of subordinate. So I did that for you, and it may get to some of your concerns, John.
All right. Well, I'd like to make a motion that we do add that topic, and as a separate motion, the other topic to the agenda. So the first motion would be that we consider, how we, as a group, get a better idea of what's going on with ADUs out there, and whether that might be a good way to spend an hour walking the village. And then I can make this other motion separately.
Is there a second?
I'd like to ask a question. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I need a motion on the floor before we
Right.
discuss.
I'll second it.
Okay, any conversation, discussion? Fred, you have a question?
I did, basic, refresh my memory. What's an ADU? I hate in acronyms.
It's an accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, thank you.
And the intent of an accessory dwelling unit is it's a by right use that people can use a minor part of their house, single family owner occupied house for a separate dwelling unit. Is there any other,
Or
questions?
build something on their property.
or build something, yeah. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, everybody's in favor of adding that to the agenda, please say aye.
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 Five. Okay, it carries.
And I'd like to move then that we add a discussion of the pros and cons, the relative merits of extending some sort of design review out beyond the downtown district and into the area where ADUs are going to happen. I would like to discuss it, pros and cons of having it throughout the village planning area, but maybe it's just the HDR, but that's my motion.
For
Second,
a second? Slim
Second.
seconds. Any discussion?
yeah, I think that
Bob?
that adds extra undue burden to it, or however the state defined it in terms of the ADUs and it being by right. So that's my view on it. Just a little bit.
Could I address that concern?
I don't think so.
Could I try? I mean, it's interesting because I've been through the design review process, I don't know, half a dozen times on major projects in downtown Bristol. I found it to be the most helpful, positive, least bureaucratic way of making sure that the projects I'm proposing fit the character of the neighborhood and therefore protect the character of the neighborhood as the regulations call for. And I don't look at it as a negative regulatory layer. I think it allows neighbors to discuss with neighbors what's going to fit. It gives the neighbors an opportunity the immediate neighbors who live around, an opportunity to weigh in at that level, which is very a neighborly conversation. And I have found it really facilitates moving the projects along and finding a project ultimately that works great. And it's the easiest part of any zoning thing I've ever been through. So I think it's a great process.
Any other discussion?
I've got a question. Yeah. Currently, if I understand correctly, when one might propose an ADU of some kind and a permit has to be issued, correct? And I think, it was one of the things I plan to talk to in the future. I think there's a 14-day period of time where neighbors could say, hey, what's going on? We want to talk about this. And isn't a part of that process, if that happens, if a neighbor says, what's going to go on here? I think I have some questions or concern. Isn't there a design review piece that goes along with that examines whether a project is consistent with the character of the neighborhood or the property that's being built on?
I would tell
Right
you.
now, there isn't.
No.
And
so what happens if someone says, I have a problem with this project. I really need to know more. The permit's been on the wall and they speak to that within 7 or 8 days. What happens after that then? Doesn't the zoning board get together and discuss things?
No, so by right basically means it's just a zoning administrator review, that you don't go before a formal board with anything. I mean, neighbors can always, so if the zoning administrator, let's say they grant the permit, you're right, there's a 15-day appeal period, basically for interested parties to appeal the decision. Neighbors can always talk. but there is no formal town governance structure to set that up. So basically, if they don't talk at the end of 15 days, one of the neighbors needs to decide whether or not they want to appeal the permit. And then it would go before your development review board. The appeal would go before the development review board.
That's if things are done
So-
right. I mean, I've been subject to a situation where I had a neighbor who got
Can we
permission.
hold, let's.
Yeah,
we're
we have a
debating
vote
the
on there.
question as
Yeah.
opposed to asking or voting as to whether we want to add it to the agenda.
I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. We may reject it, but it's certainly something to think about.
So, let's vote on it and see if we want to talk about it anymore. Says everybody's in favor of adding that to the agenda? Please say aye.
Aye.
We have 2 yeses, I believe. Anybody opposed, say nay or raise your hand.
That's a tie.
I
Anybody
didn't vote, and I
abstain?
didn't vote because I think I would like to have a discussion on this, but whether tonight's meeting is the right time to do it, I'm not exactly sure, because we do have other things on the agenda to discuss.
I would be happy to amend my agenda that my motion that we do discuss this on a future agenda, that it is warned as an agenda item, and then we don't have to discuss it tonight. But I think it's an issue that we ought to discuss at some point in this process.
So we have 2 noes, 2 yeses, and 1 abstention, or not?
Well, on the original motion, yes, I'd vote in favor of what John just said, that he amended it, that it's something that we put on the agenda in the future.
So I would withdraw my motion and call a different motion, but I think you need a second to withdraw. Is that case?
Well, at this point, we can do it as a friendly motion amendment if you want to do it that way. I'm not opposed to that.
Would do it by consensus.
So anybody have a problem with that? So the modified motion is to, at a future meeting, discuss this topic of design review for ADUs. So once again, those in favor of doing that, raise your hand, say aye. Yes.
Aye.
So there's everybody. Okay. So
Thank you.
We'll put it on next month's agenda then.
Thank you very much.
So, let me see, we're back to reviewing the agenda. I believe we've added 1 item as a discussion underneath 2, which will be number 4, entertaining a walk around tour. Any other comments, additions, or changes on the agenda? Cool, okay. So we'll go to item 2. And that is continuing work on bylaws with Adam, so let Adam start the discussion.
Okay, Kevin, thank you. Did you enable me to share my screen?
You should be co-host, yes.
Okay, so before I do that, let me just talk to you for a couple of seconds, and then I'll share my screen. So I guess just a 2-minute overview of where we are, what we're doing, why we're trying to get there, what we've done before. So basically, Bristol secured a grant from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to determine how they might change their unified development regulations, basically your zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, to enable more housing, more types of housing within your village planning area as defined by the plan. Okay. So we've done a couple of what I'd call kind of training sessions, educational sessions. We basically compared your role to and how you fit in with other roles of government. So remembering that, yes, the Planning Commission basically legislates, the zoning regs, but in Bristol, both your select board and your voters get a chance to look at them. So it is a political process that we need to think about. We've involved your zoning administrator in the conversation since he administers by right permits. And we've talked to your development review board, and will talk to your development review board more, since they're the people that basically enforce the regulations that we are writing. We also looked at demographics, the demographics of the town of Bristol, and to a lesser extent, the county, noting generally demographics are getting a little older, households are getting smaller, there's more of a need for 1 and 2 bedroom units, and less of a need for 3 bedroom units, or what you'd consider a regular single family home than there was previously. Then we got into what I'd call some of the big definitional questions, and ADUs. How do we define an ADU, and how that fits into your regulations is one of them that we're already on. We also wanted to look at duplexes and multifamily dwellings a little bit more. I want to continue the conversation about ADUs with you tonight, and I'm hoping we're going to wrap it up, but we'll see. And then what I've said to you all was, rather than looking at some of the big definitional issues, I'm going to try and give you your zoning in context, and that we would be starting with your HDR district, and we'd basically look through that district and your zoning as it governs that district. And I guess I'm hoping that the context of specifically looking at the HDR district will help give you context and allow you to make some decisions moving forward. So that's kind of where we've been, where I'm planning on going tonight. Anybody have any questions? Okay, great. Then I'm going to share my screen. Please speak up, because once I share it, my ability to see you is pretty limited. So just jump right in if you have a question. God, it's so small, I can barely see it. And I want to share. Bear with me. I want to share a tab. And Zoom doesn't do that. So I'm sorry, I am used to sharing Google Docs as opposed to Zoom. So let me see what this one gets me. Zoom to share your screen. Okay. God, Kevin, I can barely see anything.
It doesn't. I think that comes up on Zoom, yeah.
No?
No, there is.
Well, that's security and privacy. I don't need
There's one
that.
that's called, across the bottom of Zoom, there's one that's called screen share.
Right, it's in green.
Yeah,
And then this.
I think that's the one you use, maybe.
Share. And I'm going to try this. Okay. Can you all see that, or do I need to make that bigger?
So it's not on the screen.
It's not on the screen? Oop. It's on, okay. Share. It's not on the screen now?
No.
Nope.
Okay. This is going to be more difficult if I,
So I think you have to, that is up on your computer screen, right?
okay.
And then if you hit the share button on Zoom now.
I thought that, can you, I'm going to have to go closer to it.
So that's that little green tab.
Right, that's the one I've been hitting. Oh, and it went away.
Yeah, it'll fade out if you go nothing.
Share screen. Systems, it should be this one. And I should hit share. Open system preferences. Crap. I apologize. This is going to be hard for me to do if I can't share my screen though.
There it goes.
So there's
There's your
that's
agenda.
my agenda, yeah, so let me,
So you're sharing.
I can share, and the one that you pulled up. Let me see if I can pull that up. Okay.
Allow Zoom to share your screen. Okay.
So I think. So I've got this up now.
Okay. Great. Good.
I guess I can,
I guess I'll ask you to drive for me
okay,
then. So you can see here, this is basically the list of things that we will be looking, and the problem is I've got 3 others to open. We were talking about ADUs. Kevin, if you'd scroll down to the second page. And stop there. So you can see section 404. This is from your zoning regulations. And it basically defines an accessory dwelling unit. At our last meeting, we decided that we should comply with basically the statute, and therefore you can see the strike through in the section 404, the second paragraph down, where we basically struck defined as an efficiency or 1-bedroom apartment because the statute eliminated that. And then at the end of the meeting, you also asked me to define clearly subordinate. So if you look at number 3 on your screen, I took a crack at defining clearly subordinate. So I will read it to you. For the purposes of this section, clearly subordinate shall mean that the accessory dwelling unit does not exceed the greater of 30% of the total habitable floor area of the single family dwelling, or 900 square feet. And that changed from 1,000, which is currently in your regs. It basically went back to the statute. It followed the statute. Additionally, new construction shall be set back from the front property line 20 feet greater than the main structure and shall have a height of at least 20% less than the main structure. So John, this was trying to address some of the issues that you raised in particular. And I think there was some discussion last time about one ADU in particular that was, I guess, surprising to some neighbors. So if looking at your existing regulations, you already had that accessory structures needed to be basically 20 feet behind the principal front line. So not closer to the road, basically, than the primary dwelling. So I just incorporated that 20 feet in this particular proposal for this definition in this section. And then the height of the structure also seemed to be a concern. So I think it was Melissa that had made a recommendation that we reduce the height of the accessory unit so that it would be clearly subordinate. So basically in this, we've addressed size, 30% or 900 square feet. We've addressed height, 20% less than the main structure. And we've addressed location or setback, and that it has to be, it's not prominently featured. It's basically behind and subordinate to the main structure. So that was how I was proposing we'd address the discussion that we had last time. And those are the changes that I'm proposing for you to make to your regulations for this evening. So Kevin just had to step out for a second, but I think we are at a discussion point because I would like to hear what you all have to say about this proposal.
One question, Adam, is at our last meeting, I think we were discussing the number of bedrooms within an ADU compared to the primary structure. Is that something that should or could or should not be worked into that definition of clearly subordinate, being same or less than number of bedrooms?
I do remember that discussion. That is certain. I think that is something that we could add. I mean, the reason we struck the previous limit on the number of bedrooms and efficiency or 1 bedroom was because the statute had changed. And basically, if you recall, the title of the statute is paraphrasing things towns can't do. So we struck them up there. I do think you could probably say it's got to be have a less number of units than the single family home. I think if you did it within the context of clearly subordinate, that might be another basically kind of definitional restriction that you could add that plays upon the statute rather than conflicts with it, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a suggestion for you all as the planning commission to consider, and I could certainly add it if you all were interested in it.
So if I understand, if an ADU, I'm sorry, did anybody have any questions about that? So if I can ask a question, so if an existing property has a 3-bedroom house.
Yep.
You can have up to 2 bedrooms in an ADU, but not 3 or anything more than that? Is that the way it would work?
That's one of the ways you could make it work. I think that's, Rob was suggesting either equal to or less than. I think I stated
Okay.
less than. And I think you could do it either way. And remember, you do have to comply with wastewater capacity, and that's going to be a significant restriction in Bristol as well.
Based on bedrooms.
Based on bedrooms. So people may be taking a bedroom from their house and saying it's a bedroom in the ADU.
So then it had 2,
2-1.
2-1. Fred?
I've got a question, yes. In this case, could one, and have it work, put a 1,000 square foot garage and workshop, and then a 900-foot apartment upstairs in the high density residential area, and it would comply with this definition? So you'd be adding, almost 2,000 square feet.
So it'd have to be a single family dwelling for starters. So
Well,
if you have-
isn't one able to put an additional structure as long as it's appertent to the single family dwelling and have it be a garage or a tool shed or something like that? And
Yes.
if they could they put an apartment above it? And would there be restriction as to the size of that additional usage, if you will?
So I would tell you, yes, Fred, that they could. And I think your scenario would work. I would like to hear Chris's say on it. Because in your existing zoning regulations, basically under dimensional standards, you regulate footprint / structure. And for principal dwellings, it's 5,000 square feet. And for accessory dwellings, it's 900 square feet. And I'm not sure if that's the footprint or if that's the structure. So if it were the footprint, you could definitely do 900 and then do 900 as a garage and then 900 on top.
Even if the home was only 1,500?
Well, so this definition, or I tell you, this applies to the accessory dwelling unit, not to the total size of the structure. So if you had a 900 square foot apartment as you proposed on top of your garage, then I think that would comply with this, this as it is written.
And there's nothing within the rules that are written that speaks to the nature of the structure and what it can be. I mean, what I'm driving at is this, okay? I got involved in the planning commission before this came up. I had someone build a 2,400 square foot warehouse on 1/3 of an acre. Chris admitted the footprint was too big and he blew it. And there originally was going to be proposed in the second floor, which had been 1,200 feet, an apartment. Can one build a 2,000 or 2,400 square foot girdered metal building like you'd see in industrial zones and whatever within the village of Bristol behind in the high density residential area? Is this language permitted?
So the language as proposed, the accessory dwelling portion of it, the apartment portion of it could be the greater of 30% of the size of the main structure or 900 square feet. So theoretically, the apartment could be, let's say, 900 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
That could be over a garage. The other things that I just put in that I'm proposing tonight that are not currently in your regs, but I'm proposing tonight to get to the clearly subordinate portion of the regulation is that are basically go to the height, so 20% less than the 20% less than the main structure, and also go to the location 20 feet behind the front line of the main structure, which may or may not help if it's in the backyard. I suppose we could add another that was the combined of if the accessory apartment is in another building, the combined size of the building has to be less than X, less than the size of the main structure, some percentage less than the size of the main structure. You know, I know we said we defer design criteria. If you're going to,
And we can discuss that in the future. I just anyone in the village, they've seen this, I think, and it's quite something.
So
and it's located 10 foot from my property and 25 feet from my backdoor patio, so it's something that has a meaning, so to speak.
Yes, so I was trying to get to some of the impacts of that with the additions of clearly subordinate that I gave you. Rob has suggested an additional one. It sounds like you're suggesting an additional one as well on the total size of the structure. And Rob suggested a number of bedrooms less than the main structure.
I think both of those suggestions are good in terms of allowing additional density, which I think is good. Um, but doing it in a fashion that it doesn't significantly change the character of the village of Bristol in a big way. And putting a building, a secondary building to the primary, which has as many square feet or larger than the primary in a backyard on a third of an acre, which many of the lots in the village of Bristol are, seems a little out of sort. And I don't know what I would suggest, but it could be something as a function of the existing family dwelling that it, it maybe is only a certain percentage of that in size. And I don't have any magic number there. I
So I
certainly
guess the,
would want a dwelling unit, the 900 square feet dwelling unit certainly seems reasonable. If it's going on top of a 1,000 square foot garage workshop, that to me may not be feasible.
so the first, let's take these two as two different topics. And the first one with having bedrooms less than or equal to the main structure, which was brought up. Does anybody have any thoughts or discussion about working that into the definition?
Yeah.
John?
I would, yes, I mean, I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. Excuse me. If we look at page 30 of the zoning regulations currently, that happens to be the design review section for the downtown that's currently in force. And on page 30, there are 10 starts. It goes over to page 31, but it starts on page 30. There's 10 categories that the design review board is going to look at for any project going through that process. And I would submit to you all that these are exactly the issues and considerations we want to make when looking at a project like the one Fred was talking about. And I would submit that if a project like that had gone through these 10 measures by, a board of it, townspeople who are on the design review board, and they're looking for ways to make it possible that we're going to come up with a better outcome than we did in that instance, Fred. I think, when we're just to zoom back out for a second, we're asking to add more density to Bristol. And I think I've heard a lot of support for that. I certainly support that. The density we add, we need to have a higher sense of review for that kind of stuff, because our mission is to protect, as the zoning regs say, protect the existing character. So we can't have lower standards for infill like ADUs or any kind of infill on village lots. We need higher review, higher standards, so it fits better, because ultimately we want the village to be dense. And we want people to live together in a way that makes sense in that denser area. So we need to be considering standards to measure these things that are more stringent, not less stringent. We don't want to just say, everybody in the village build an ADU like the one on Garfield Street. Please, no.
Well, so. Okay.
Kevin, would you scroll down for me for just
Sure.
a second and go to the statute? Whoop, and you went a little further. Oh, go back.
Oh, the screen.
This,
part here.
right there. Yes. So can you all see the portion of the page that begins with "except for flood hazard or fluvial erosion areas"? That's a direct quote from the statute. So when I did this for you, I wanted to see the statute that we were working from, because again, the title of the statute is basically prohibitive of things towns can do. So I would take you to a bylaw may require about halfway down the a quarter of the way down the highlighted area, a bylaw may require a single-family dwelling with an accessory design unit to be subject to the same review, dimensional or other controls as required for a single-family dwelling without an accessory dwelling unit. I don't believe that you can make it more stringent. So if you're, again, we'll have the design review conversation later, but if you're thinking about it for accessory dwelling units, you're gonna have to do it for all single family houses too. So just food for thought.
That may not be a bad idea.
Okay, so let's go back. Do we want to discuss bedrooms in this definition or not?
Can I just point one thing out in what Adam was referring to there? I don't think, like, we're not trying to exclude a permitted use. We want to just make them fit, right? So we can have standards for ADUs if we want them.
So I think Adam's
But it
point
needs to
was
match.
that you have to apply it to all the single family dwellings in order for it to be enforceable. So you can't pick and choose what you want for an ADU. So I'm,
But in the design review district we have now, we can apply it to buildings.
that's because it's.
I mean, every building I've ever done has gone through a design review process.
Within that district. So I'm not sure where we're going with this thing. Is there a concern by other people on the board about making a lot of regulation within this ADU, and then we're going to go to something different, such as design review for the whole high density residential district? I mean, that's really what I think John's pitching.
It sounds like to reach what John's after, the whole village area should be design review for everything.
Or the high density residential.
So,
I mean, the ADU action is going to happen in the village, and that's mostly what HDR and some other zones around the edges, some mix, I guess. But that's where it's going to happen. And it's also the area where that sort of thing is going to has the most potential impact, you know, when you're squeezing new density out of the existing acreage. So I can't believe the statute would keep us from having reasonable standards to guide that, like we do in other districts in our regs, especially when we're given the mission by the district to protect
so
the existing
think-
character.
John, it goes back to the question of consistency across that type of housing. And so we had talked about tabling it, but the question, but then all of a sudden it's coming back up as we look at how we want to shape this definition of subordinate. And I'm hearing a one-sided conversation here too. I'm not hearing a lot of perspective from the other members.
I've got something to say.
Go ahead.
I think that word subordinate might be a way into this, besides for dimensions and setbacks and things. It seems to me it could also cover aesthetics to some degree, design, which we're not supposed to be talking about, but since we are, why I can easily picture a nice, just some typical house in Bristol. And for example, is that big metal structure actually subordinate to that house? I would think subordinate would imply at least to some degree, a similar look, but smaller. But to completely change the look and make it of different materials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I don't think fits a definition of subordinate, or I think it could certainly be looked at that way. Does anybody have anything to say about that?
So I think that was Slim.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess then what I was trying to do was use clearly subordinate to define a few things that would make it clearly subordinate, and you all have suggested a couple of others. And that's one way to do it. The other way that John has raised would be to make the HDR district or the village planning area potentially, or whatever areas you all chose to, subject to design review as your business area is. So,
Sure, I'm not opposed to that either, but I thought if that was not something that was going to be well received, perhaps the word subordinate could help us get near at least to what we're looking for here. Those of us who are concerned about the, let's just say, the look of that neighbor to Mr. Baser. I'm not interested in having that type of building going up in Bristol Village either.
so I agree with you, Slim, and one of the ways I was trying to amend or give you a way of using clearly subordinate is the definition that I've proposed that we were talking about.
I like what you did. I think it could maybe go further.
And in what ways? I mean, we had a couple suggestions on the table. I tried to separate them out, and we keep going back to this. You know, everybody should go through a design review. So in a sense,
I'm happy to put this off since we decided not to, but it seems that this is what we're talking about. But if we'll talk about it next meeting, that's fine with me too. But we should do whatever you need to do time-wise.
Bill, you haven't had any comments yet. Do you have anything to add? Is he still there?
He stepped away.
Fred, you have any other things to?
I guess the only contribution I would make goes along the lines of what I said before. What's happened in my backyard is water under the bridge. But I'd hate to have a property owner's interpretation of what could or couldn't be done, create a structure that is totally out of keeping with the residential area of the community. I don't think we allow within the high density residential someone to put an auto body shop in their backyard. I think that's a rule. I don't think we allow anyone within the village of Bristol to put in a machine shop or a construction venue to build windows and doors for sales. I don't think those are permitted. With the building that occurred in the backyard behind me, any one of those things could be done there. And unless someone blows a whistle or something like that, it doesn't come to light. And I'd hate for structures to get built that are going to be there indefinitely and have a use 10, 20, 30 years down the road a piece develop that wasn't in keeping with the permit and whatever that was originally done. And at least in the building that I know of, all those things could occur. And so how we can make sure a building that is added for housing is clearly housing, and it fits in with the neighborhood versus something that clearly isn't and seems just so out of place. I don't want to make it complicated, and maybe we don't need a design review board, but maybe some language that speaks to the fact that things have to be done in character with the residential area could be one way to approach it, because anyone, I think, that looked at that building would say it is not in character with anything around them. It's totally out of character. And that's where I guess, that's my thoughts on the subject. And if there's a way of doing it in a simple fashion with a simple adding of a sentence, that's cool. I mean, a lot of people build garages and whatever, and most of the garages in the village of Bristol, you walk around, they're all in character. There's nothing wild and crazy out there that I'm aware of anyway. Bristol works, and all the buildings there look a lot better than the building in my backyard.
I mean, I got to jump in and add just again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but those 10 design standards in the design review are like, if you read them, actually read them, they're very loose and they provide a ton of discretion for the board members to think about scale and height and setback. And there's a lot of room there for them to work with the applicant to make it work. I mean, just read every single one of them is written with tons of room in there for exactly that. It's the least bureaucratic set of non-rules that approach being rules that I've ever seen. And it's very helpful. I've used them myself many times. And like, it also puts people at the table who I think can look at each other and say, oh yeah, well, these are my neighbors and this applicant wants to do a good thing here. And we're going to help them by applying these sort of general ideas about scale and height and architectural features, materials, like maybe an all metal flat roof building is not the best thing in a particular location, and that can be haggled out. It just seems like a very community-minded approach to me, that's all. I had one separate question, has nothing to do with that, but if you would scroll up just a bit on the screen share, I just want to make sure I understand what number 3 says. It's the one with the strikeout. So if there's a 4,000 square foot or 30,000 square foot main house on a property, according to number 3 here, what does that language say? That you could have something that was not more than 900 square feet or 30%? I'm not sure which is the,
Right.
I just not.
Whichever's greater.
Whichever is greater. It doesn't say that.
It does.
Does not
Does the
exceed
greater
the
of
greater.
30% of the total.
Oh, I
will
see.
have-
Does not exceed the greater of. I got you. Right. My misreading. Thank you.
And that's taken directly from the statute below it too. So I don't think you have a lot of discretion there.
Right. I mean, we don't have to copy the statute in every way, do we? We have some means of writing our own regs, right?
Yes, the answer is you can be less restrictive than the statute, but you need to allow, the statute's a floor, you need to allow everything it enables, and then you could allow more if you chose to.
Right.
So
But
you
if
can
we
be less
allow
restrictive.
ADUs, it doesn't say that we can't regulate ADUs.
Well, yes, it does. And I didn't include it here, but basically the statute is 24 VSA 4412, and the title of that statute is basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it's things that towns can't do, things that towns can't govern. So you have to allow ADUs, and you have to allow them to this minimum floor. If you want to make it easier to put in ADUs, you can, if you want, but you are not supposed to make it harder. As Slim suggested, what I was trying to do was use the clearly subordinate language within the statute itself to define and define what clearly subordinate means, to get to some of the size, the aesthetic concerns that that I heard at the last meeting.
Right. So if we allow them, we can allow them, but guide their scale and height and setback and proportion and materials and architectural features and that sort of thing.
I would tell you that for most of those things, if you go again down to the statute, a bylaw may require a single-family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit to be subject to the same review, dimensional, other controls as required for the single-family dwelling without an accessory unit. So if you can't just create a design review for accessory dwelling units, you'd create one for basically single-family residence as well. you all can choose to do that. That's a big debate.
We couldn't just treat all ADUs equally and say all ADUs need to go through design review?
No, John, you didn't listen to what he said.
I'm not comprehending.
Has to
I'm
do-
sorry.
Yeah, so, I guess the question is, and maybe we take a straw poll, do we want to walk down a path that we start design review for all single-family dwelling units where there are ADUs, which is every zone?
Well,
Who's in favor of doing that?
I'm still not clear on whether, like if somebody has an existing house and they come to get a permit to build an auxiliary building, like say a garage or an ADU or both, a building that's both. We're not taking away their the permit they already have for the house that exists. We're just dealing with the ADU. We're not permitting the whole property again. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So if we treat all ADUs as the same, why doesn't that meet the statute?
Because you have to treat single family houses proposing ADUs or incorporating ADUs the same as you treat all single family housing units. The
So
purpose of the
every single-
statute is to promote ADUs or allow ADUs.
We couldn't do a review of those ADUs, John, unless we also did reviews on every single new single family home within that.
So I guess let's do a straw poll. Do we want to walk down the path to start entertaining design review for single-family dwellings to be consistent with regulating ADUs? Anybody that's in favor of that, put your thumb up or say yes.
Yeah,
Okay, we got 2 people that say yes.
Fred said yes. There's
Well,
3.
no, I want to make a contribution, I guess. I would love to see Adam see if there's a way to address this before we go down that additional path. Once again, thinking long-term, I understand our intentions, and I think they're decent intentions, but sometimes you have unintended consequences, and it may make building housing, whether it's in the high-density residential of Bristol downtown or outside of it, more complicated. And I don't think any of us want to do that. By the same token, I've got to believe there can be a simple way, language-wise, that further explains what subordinate to the main home is, or something along those lines that would prevent something that's a little bit out there, for lack of a better way of putting it, rather than necessarily automatically me voting for one way or another on this issue.
so
I
suggestion,
don't know, Adam, whether you have any thoughts on that.
could I give a thought?
Sure.
Go ahead, Jim.
How about at the end of your new red edition with your sizes and things, something like using similar materials to the house, to the original house, just using similar materials. There's already, I mean, the house is not being affected. I don't know. What's the problem with that?
So in addition to discussing, so we've got the 30% or 900 square feet, the greater of, we've got the setbacks from the front of the property. We've got basically the height of the building being 20% less. I've heard Rob suggest perhaps the number of bedrooms should be equal or less to, and it could be either of those. The total structure size should be less than some proportion of the main structure is a suggestion I think Fred made earlier.
Right.
And now you're suggesting perhaps we also add similar characteristics to the
Well,
main
shall have a height
structure.
of at least 20% less than the main structure and using similar materials, or yeah, like that, something like this. That might be simple anyway.
That's I think, again, within the what constitutes clearly subordinate, having it of similar construction type or similar, sorry, I lost what you said, but I expect if you chose to do that, you could.
Good. Thank you.
So these are some of the issues that are dealt with in the design review process. So how, I'm not clear on how it's okay in one way to put them in here. And
So I guess, John, I'd say I'm playing on the statute also says that it's going to be clearly subordinate to the main structure. So let me an accessory dwelling unit means a distinct unit that is clearly subordinate to a single family dwelling. So since the statute gives us that leeway, I'm trying to use that leeway to define clearly subordinate in a manner that works for all of you. But I think that's very different than subjecting basically everything within the a high density area or village or to basically design review.
So I want to get past this design review business. So unless we have a lot of interest, John and Slim have indicated they're interested in it. And if anybody else is interested in pursuing design review across whatever districts that we end up with it, we need to start that discussion. If there's not interest, then we just need to go on with life.
would it be possible to have language in a zoning reg that said houses that are, everybody needs to go through design review except for houses that are not having ADUs, you know, and everybody's treated equally, right? Everybody has to go through it unless you have an ADU, and then, or it doesn't have to go through unless you have an ADU, and then you do. I
So
just
two
can't
people
believe
That's
have
the
that there's,
same thing as saying
John,
only
hold on.
ADUs.
John, you just keep going back to the same thing. There, two people have indicated they're willing to pursue design review, and that's not a majority. And anybody else wants to raise their hand, or else we'll just move on and set it aside.
I think another way to frame that question is, do we want to let people do anything they want in the village? And clearly, that's a rhetorical question. No, but we don't want more of what happened on Garfield Street to happen. So how do we do that?
I
So I
think
think we're
everybody's
back-
getting hung up on an unfortunate situation and has to remember that there's also a difference between an accessory structure and an ADU. And if
Correct.
somebody builds a garage or accessory structure, it's different than an ADU.
So I'm not hearing a lot of interest in design review. So I think we're back to the definition and come up with whatever we consider subordinate within this section to make everybody happy. And I think right now we've got 3 considerations on the table in addition to what Adam has drafted up.
I would agree with you. It's the number of bedrooms, less or equal, and that's a little bit of a decision. The total structure size. And then the
Consistent construction.
consistent construction materials.
Is everybody in sync with that? Any discussion on that?
Well, I'd like to add, I mean, setback would be one to consider, right? I know that's not really, doesn't really, I get you.
Well, you've already got your existing setbacks. We're going to talk about those later.
Right.
So I guess I've got a question, the second one, which has to do with total area. I'm a little confused why, when you're limiting an ADU to 30% or 900 feet, what situation would we want to indicate that it's got to be a smaller size or whatever that wording is?
So I think it's when people combine two accessory uses, so they combine an accessory dwelling unit with a garage, let's say. This regulates the size of the accessory dwelling unit, but not necessarily the garage.
So you're adding more space and taking a part of that additional space. Okay.
But would it,
I
would
mean,
that fall under the dimensional standards for the zoning that we already have then for the accessory structure outside of the ADU?
so in your regulations, again, there's a line that says footprint / structure. And basically it limits the 5,000 square feet, the size of a principal dwelling, and 1,000 square feet to the accessory. If it's the footprint and it's a 2-story building, that could be 2,000 square feet. But if it's the total structure size, then you've already addressed the garage and the ADU would have to be smaller than that number together. So I'm not sure how Chris is interpreting that.
Would have to be smaller than what together?
1,000 square feet is what's in your current regulations.
I can tell you how Chris is interpreting it, okay? Because the building that we're talking about on Garfield was originally going to have an apartment upstairs and a work area downstairs. And so, and Chris felt that that was acceptable as long as the footprint for the apartment was no more than 1,000 feet. And so, and this ended up being 24 because Chris dropped the ball. And so I think he interprets that you can have an accessory dwelling, an accessory
Building
workshop, garage, something that is whatever that word is to the dwelling, something that'd be useful, like a tool shed or whatever, although in this instance, much bigger. And then you could put the maximum apartment that you could up above, which you end up having a significantly sized building that could be bigger than the house, the way it is worded now.
And in that instance, Fred, I mean, the zone for HDR says that the footprint can't be more than 1,000 square feet. And in the original application for that building, it was shown to be 1,200, 30 by 40.
Yes. But even if it was 1,000, it would have been a 2,000 square foot building in the end, which I think is a few more square feet than the duplex that is in front of it, which is a whole nother story.
Right. And the main property is a duplex, which is not allowed.
And there is an accessory dwelling unit permitted when
Right.
you've already got a duplex in today's zoning.
Right. So, I mean, all of this is moot if the rules aren't followed.
Correct.
And in that instance, they were not.
I would like to see the footprint in total of any structure be limited. I have no problem someone adding a 900 square foot addition onto the back of a house, or perhaps in a separate standalone building to rent. But to double that or more seems a little out of scope when you've got 1/4 acre and 1/3 acre lots in the village.
Okay. So, I believe do we have consensus that we want to modify the definition of clearly subordinate with those 3 issues?
And the 3 issues are,
So one is, let's see if I can remember them.
I wrote them down: square footage, total structure, height, number of bedrooms, and I wrote design here, but I'm not sure anybody else actually used that word. It was something else,
Yeah,
like materials or
consistent
something.
construction materials, I think is the term that we decided.
Would
on.
design be somehow?
Consistent construction material, design is not.
Consistent materials is good.
Design gets back to your hot button, John, and that's.
and it can be a slippery slope, I think.
I agree.
So So how do we want to handle this? I don't hear a lot of screaming. I hear some people relatively quiet. Do we just go ahead?
I like it.
Okay,
So I will take those 3 suggestions, less bedrooms, total structures, limiting total structure size, and consistent construction materials, and put them into actual sentences and bring them back to you next time.
Awesome.
Thank you.
good.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now, let's see. How much longer do you want to go?
I think
Kevin?
if we go until 8:30, that's an hour and a half. So we got a little bit to start, but I
Okay,
don't have anything to do afterwards.
okay.
Keep going.
Yes, I will. My plan was to go to your high density residential district and work through basically your existing zoning for that and talk about dimensional standards. So, Kevin, in the email I sent you tonight, Chris tonight, since I can't share my screen, dimensional standards right there.
Yeah. Everywhere turn. Oops, never mind. I'll do this differently. Oops.
Are you in share and therefore it's not working for you? Actually, okay.
Where'd it go? I'm on the wrong document.
How about if I ask you to go into the full map set for me? And I'll tell you what we're gonna do, and we'll do it for next time. There you go. Okay. So I would ask you to look at the top of those dimensional requirements where it says HDR in the upper left-hand corner. So this is really looking at your setbacks and your dimensional standards that are in your HDR district. So in 2017, 2007, you had a study done that basically looked at the village. It looked at 4 different parts of the village, actually, not the whole village. And it said, well, what are our lot sizes? What's our lot frontage? What's our lot depth and our coverage? And what's the existing zoning? So we looked at basically the exact same areas to see how things might have changed from 2007 to 2022. And then basically ran the same analysis. So if you look at, for example, lot size and look at 2022, your average lot sizes within within one block of the HDR district was what we looked at. And it was the block bounded by Pleasant Street, Taylor Ave, Elm Street, and North Street. So it's the same block as they studied in 2007. That's how we chose it. There are 15 total units on that, or 15 lots on that block. The average Lot size was a 0.04 acres. They ranged from 0.2 acres to 0.6 acres, or from 8,712 square feet to 26,000 square feet. When we compare that with your zoning, with your current bylaws, which is right down below, your minimum square footage is 10,000 square feet. So you've got basically a couple of lots that don't quite meet that 10,000 square foot minimum, but most of them do. And the average is pretty significantly above that. And for practical purposes, an acre is 44,000 square feet, just about, or a little more than that. So if you consider 10,000 square feet is roughly equivalent to a quarter of an acre, it's a little less than a quarter of an acre, just to give you all some context. So the purpose of this exercise is, well, do your bylaws, do your current dimensional standards reflect what's on the ground in the village of Bristol? So will they help basically keep the village? Will they protect the existing character and maintain the district's traditional settlement patterns and residents' quality of life? And here you can argue that they certainly capture most of that area. There are a couple of lots that were developed probably prior to, certainly prior to zoning, that were smaller, but they capture most of them. The question for you on this one, and I don't want to do this one necessarily first, but would be, is the minimum standard that you have, 10,000 square feet, roughly a quarter of an acre, appropriate? Should you reduce it to include basically the outliers, the existing small lots, or does it make sense to you? And again, remember, our charge is to help people basically develop housing within the village of Bristol while protecting the existing character. I'm going to let that thought sit with you, because I'm hoping there are a couple of easy ones that we can take care of and I can check off my list. And this one is probably one of the harder dimensional standards for us to talk about. So I'm going to move on to the 75 feet of lot frontage with you.
So do you want to try to get that map up, or is that the table more important to you?
Would you all like to see a map depicting what I'm talking about?
No.
The map may be easier for people to use. I don't know. Some
Sure.
people think.
Let's take a quick peek and see.
Okay.
So which one is it? It's the,
This one. And then it would be this one is the same thing.
okay.
It's a big file. It may take the time to load.
Oh, there it is. I had pulled it up, but I was having trouble getting it. So that,
There you are. So you can all see that's the sample block that we took a look at in your high density residential district. So block bounded by Pleasant Street, Taylor Ave, Elm Street, North Ave. So you can see the different parcels. You can see there are a lot of outbuildings that potentially could be converted into housing if you chose to, without really changing your fabric, I guess I'd say. We just talked about basically the size. So the average size of those lots is 0.4 acres. The smallest one is 0.2 acres. Probably the one right in the middle there on Pleasant Street. Yeah, right. I would best bet it's the one, not with the red roof, but next to the red roof. Or am I reading that upside down?
I think it's the one on Elm Street, second in from north, that looks like the smallest.
I would have said the third one in on Pleasant Street, but maybe you're right. The one up on Elm Street, second in, is probably the smallest. So again, your standards are 10,000 square feet, roughly a quarter of an acre. There's one up there, and you're right, it's probably the one on Elm Street, second one in, that's 0.2. The rest of them average 0.4. So greater than a quarter of an acre. What I want to go to next, if I could, is basically your lot frontage. Your current zoning is 75 feet. You don't have to go back. We can use that if we want to.
Okay.
Or we can go to the, if you could pull that one up, that would be great. So look, using the same chart, basically, while Kevin pulls that up, your lot frontage for your zoning, your current zoning is 75 square feet. Your lot frontage, your average lot frontage on this parcel is 102 square feet. So basically everybody has enough or more, or most have enough or more. Average has enough or more. There are a couple parcels there, and they're highlighted in red, that have basically 60 feet of frontage. So the question to you on this one would be, would you change the minimum from 75 to 60 feet in this district and accommodate basically the dimensional requirements for those lots? Or do you think because they're going to have trouble redeveloping or developing further? They're grandfathered in, but anytime they want to add something, and I wish Chris were here for this conversation, they are basically in violation of your zoning. So one of the ways to simplify life for that type of lot, and there are others in the HDR surrounding this parcel certainly, would be to shrink your minimum requirement for frontage from 75 feet in this case to 60 feet would capture everything.
Adam, is this data based strictly on the A&R tax map parcel data, or is this field measurements and meets and bounds from survey plats?
Let's see. I don't know whether it comes from A&R or whether it comes from your actual, I think it comes from your tax maps, Rob.
Which are plus or minus however many feet. They're close for planning purposes, but they're not exact by any
They're
means.
not perfect, but I would tell you back in 2007, I bet they went, one of the reasons we used these was because they went out and actually did meets and bounds surveys.
Okay.
So that's why we used the same footprint. So I'm pretty confident that this data is pretty accurate.
Okay.
I don't think it's a survey, but I think it's pretty good.
So if I could ask a question, So the combination of sort of lot coverage and frontage provides kind of a formula for suggesting whether somebody, or indicating whether somebody can build an ADU.
Well, lot size, lot frontage, lot depth, and then you had have front yard and side yard setbacks. Are the dimensional requirements that are in your current zoning. So they get to how, yes, where on existing lots you might be able to redevelop, build a new structure, add on to your existing structure.
But this is for all zoning, not just ADUs.
The particular dimensions that I gave you, they're for any construction, correct? Not just ADUs. They could be for another, they could be for a garage, they could be for, yeah. Any other allowable structure in your zoning. They're basically fixed dimensional requirements.
So if a lot is non-conforming in some sort of setback or area, whatever, does that prohibit you from putting an ADU on in it, or can you still do it?
Your zone or your development review board can give waivers, but rather than it being a permitted use. So if I lived on a lot that completely conformed and I brought in a plan to Chris for a permitted use that met basically all the dimensional standards, then I could, Chris could hand me a permit, I'd wait my 15-day appeal period, and then I could start building. You would be basically in the same position, but on one of the smaller lots, let's say. If you didn't meet the dimensional requirements, Chris would say, well, I can't give you a permit, but you could go to the development review board and ask for a waiver. So there's additional time, money, and potentially the decision's not nearly as certain as a permitted use. So it adds some friction to the system, let's say, and friction is expense. And what we're trying to do is make things simpler.
And
Are you saying variances? Are you referring to variances?
Waivers and variances are similar, but variances actually are a very strict, again, legal definition where you have to meet all 5 criteria, and generally nobody can. So a few sessions ago, the legislature enabled waivers, which gives the DRB the discretion to waive setbacks under certain conditions, and each town gets to describe those conditions. So very similar in concept, but at least theoretically, they should be easier in practice.
And okay, that's where I was going with the variances, but so I should know, but I don't know if we've got anything in there that addresses waivers in our.
You do.
We do. Okay.
The question is, could you make it, do you have a desire to make it easier for them, given that most of these lots were developed prior to zoning? Are you interested in changing the dimensional standards to match sometimes the lowest common denominator or not on the map? And rather than going into this, let me just describe the other ones to you, and you can think about it, because some of them you do a pretty good job with. So lot depth, for example, your lot depth minimum is 75 feet in your zoning. Basically, every single lot in this particular area, and I would say the vast majority of them in your village, meet the lot depth requirements. So I would not suggest that you make any changes to lot depth. Lot coverage. And lot coverage refers to impervious surfaces. So if you look at basically the buildings that are out highlighted in white on your screen and then add their driveways to them, coverage goes to what percent can be impervious surface, so buildings and driveways. So you can see from 2007 to 2022, people did add some people, the average went up, basically from 14% to 22%. The range stayed relatively similar, so it was mostly the, I'll call it underdeveloped, or the parcels with less impervious surface that increased. You have a maximum of 50%, so that's a pretty big maximum. That's 5,000 square feet, right? So that would be a pretty big building, or a building with a pretty big building and or parking space and or garage. But all of you can also see that basically your range gets up to 25%. They're all significantly lower than your current coverage maximum. So to make things easier to build, you really don't need to change anything there. You could make other changes if you chose to. Lastly, the front yard setback, setback from the road. So basically, let's see, you don't have any structures within 40 feet of the setback, and your setback requirement is 40 feet. So it looks like when you developed these, you chose a pretty good standard. If you were to raise that to 45 feet, 7% of the structures, and within 50 feet, 5% or 33% of the structures would violate your setbacks. So at 40 feet, nobody does. It's a pretty good standard because you can see how close to the front of the property line a lot of those buildings are in the map. So I guess I would suggest to you that you don't need to look at your front yard setback. You don't need to look at your coverage. You don't need to look at your lot depth. You may want to look at changing your lot frontage from 75 feet to 60 feet and basically capture all of these and make them permitted. You may want to lessen the square footage of your lot size down to, say, 8,000 square feet if you wanted to catch all of, basically include all the lot sizes. And I think I'd like to stop there and bring those questions up to you next time and ask you that your homework is basically considering those questions. And I'll send this to you tomorrow. I'll send you the, or actually you already have
it, so I can distribute it.
Yeah, and then next time we'll start our discussion there with the dimensional sizes in the HDR district.
Okay.
I have a question, Adam.
Yes, Fred.
What would two septic systems, how many square feet would that take, assuming we're adding a subsequent unit onto, I'm asking that from this total square footage thing that you have. And are you allowed, once you put a septic unit in, can you have a driveway go over it? I mean, what is permitted or not permitted in terms of usage? Are there any rules?
There are a lot of rules regarding septic usage, including setbacks. I believe your setbacks from structures for septic systems are 50 feet or so. They are not considered impervious surfaces, so they are not included in the coverage ratio. But certainly allowing an area for septic systems, because Bristol does not have a sewer, is something that anybody who's designing anything has to take into consideration. So as a kind of a local Bristol example, I'd point you to the Commons, Bristol Commons, and the septic area there is the common, basically. So the area that serves, at least that's the main one. There may be some subsidiary ones, but the main one is the common, the grassed area in the middle, and it serves at least all of the new construction. And I would tell you, they met your dimensional your coverage requirements. So those buildings that they put in there met all of your dimensional standards or secured a waiver for a PUD for some of them. There may be some buildings that are closer because it's a commonly developed project.
Is there any other questions or closing questions for Adam? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And I
Thank you
will,
for
Thanks, Adam.
running the slides.
not a problem. I will send those. Tomorrow to everybody.
Okay. I'm gonna,
Oh, wait a minute, we had added, I guess, I don't know if you need to be here for that, but we had added an agenda item to entertain a walking tour for ADUs. Is there any, I don't know if that, you don't.
I mean, this could be really quick. I was just wondering if anybody wanted to go out. I would do it. I love to educate myself about what do these things look like in the village as they stand now? And
Yeah,
I don't know, like there may be like really good examples that we could learn from, and there might be some bad examples we could learn from. And
and I think we
anybody's
need,
game for that. I'm game for it.
I think we need Chris's input as to where to go. And I think Chris had some homework to come up with the number of ADUs in the village planning area, if not the town as well. Of course, unfortunately, he's not here tonight, so.
Yeah, he said, if I recall last meeting, he said, it's a very popular inquiry. Not that people actually go ahead all the way and like submit the application, but he gets a lot of questions about,
Right.
hey, thinking about an ADU. So I'm curious how that plays out.
Yeah, yeah. Do we want to try to set up something now, or do we want to touch base next month with Chris and get some input from him?
I don't feel any urgency over it right now, although I think it would be helpful even, if we could do something before our next meeting, but I know it's late. I don't want to keep people around thinking about that, but maybe we can do it offline or something. I don't know.
Let me talk to Chris and see what he can put together for us for a little tour, and then I will send that out to everybody for consideration.
Great. That satisfies me.
And, it would be just a planning exercise, not a meeting, so we don't have
Yeah.
to deal with public meeting requirements, so.
I just have as the role model, every year the select board goes out and looks at the sidewalks and the drainage ditches and road conditions and that sort of
Oh,
thing.
they run a Betcha bus, should we do that?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I think we're on to administrative matters now. And the first one is approval of last month's meeting minutes. Entertain a motion to do that.
So moved.
Oh, I'm all set.
Are you okay?
And second, I don't think any discussion? No, everybody in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, carries. Zoning administrator report. We don't have a zoning administrator with us tonight, so that's an easy one. ARPA funding committee update.
So the final list of potential items will be going out to the public very shortly. I think within the week, probably Front Porch Forum and other meets, and it's an online ranking / survey for that.
Okay, thank you.
I know you don't want to give us a spoiler, but there are some good things on there.
There's 20 items on there.
So quite a few different ones.
Oh, there's a lot of options.
Been a lot of work, I know. Thanks for sticking to that.
And then the last thing is miscellaneous correspondence. There isn't much to talk about. I can't remember the name of it, but the waterway grant that, John, you were looking at, interested in. They extended the deadline and they massaged some of the requirements a little bit. The deadline's out into early February now. The other one is we were getting minutes from the Bicycle Walking Advisory Committee, or whatever they call themselves. And we haven't had any in the last couple of months. And I looked on the website and they haven't been active since, early summer. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I'm not hiding information from you guys for that group. And that's it for miscellaneous correspondence. If anybody's got any comments or questions for that. We have no new business, and I'll entertain public comment, but we don't have any public here, so that's easy. And entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, Rob seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Anybody opposed? Okay. It's a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Lively discussion tonight. I think we got some good things going.
I agree.
Everybody.
Bye.